If someone had told me that my life would completely change over a single cup of coffee, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened on a random Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle. The day my husband looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I need to tell you something." I remember the smell of burnt espresso, the soft jazz music playing in the background, and how my fingers were wrapped around a warm mug I never actually drank from. His voice shook a little when he spoke, and my heart started racing before he even said the words. I don't know why, maybe because deep down, I already knew. When you've been with someone long enough, you can feel the truth before they ever say it. His name is Ethan. And for most of our 5-year marriage, I thought he was the best thing that ever happened to me. He was charming, successful, and had this calm confidence that could make anyone feel safe. But that day, he couldn't even look at me. His hands were trembling. "I messed up," he said softly. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean messed up?" He paused for what felt like forever, and then his next words shattered every piece of my heart. "I've been seeing someone else. My boss, actually." I swear, for a second, the world just froze. The coffee shop noise faded out. It was like I'd been sucked into some silent, colorless tunnel where nothing made sense anymore. His boss, the woman he'd always told me not to worry about, the one who only saw him as a hard-working employee. I couldn't even cry at first. I just stared at him, my throat dry, my hands numb. My brain was still catching up to what my ears had just heard. "You slept with her?" I asked quietly, my voice cracking. He nodded. "Just once," he said. "It didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything." Those 4 words hit harder than the confession itself. It's funny how people try to make betrayal sound smaller, like minimizing it will somehow make it less painful. But when the person you build your world around tells you they've shared your bed's loyalty with someone else, nothing is small about that. I stood up, but my legs felt weak. I couldn't even look at him. "I think you should go," I whispered. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. I remember his wedding ring glinting under the coffee shop lights, and that tiny flash of gold made my stomach turn. I walked out before the tears came. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor, the tiles cold against my skin, scrolling through our old photos, Hawaii, our anniversary dinner, the goofy selfies we took on Sunday mornings when he made pancakes. I kept asking myself, why wasn't I enough? But then something inside me shifted. I realized that I had spent years building his dreams, supporting his career, pushing him forward. And what did I get in return? Lies, betrayal, a husband who sold our marriage for a promotion. So I decided right there, if he could break me this easily, I would rebuild myself into someone untouchable, someone he would never forget. The next morning, I packed my things. No yelling, no crying, no drama, just quiet resolve. I left my ring on the kitchen counter next to a note that simply said, "You chose her. I'm choosing me." I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, peeling wallpaper, flickering lights, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts without his voice interrupting them. The silence was painful, yes, but it was also cleansing. I started journaling every night, writing down every emotion, anger, grief, humiliation, until the pages turned into plans. I didn't know exactly what my future would look like, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone make me feel small again. And somewhere between all that pain and determination, an idea began to form, a business idea. It started with a single journal entry: "If he can cheat with his boss, I'll become the boss he could never have." That one sentence changed everything. I didn't have money, or connections, or a clear path, but I had something stronger: fire. And I was ready to use it. The first few weeks after Ethan's confession felt like walking barefoot through glass. Every corner of my apartment reminded me of what I'd lost, the love I thought was real, the life I thought I had. But pain has this strange way of turning into energy if you let it. I decided I wasn't going to spend my nights crying over someone who chose to betray me. If he could rebuild his life with someone else, I could rebuild mine from the ground up. It started small. I'd wake up every morning, make coffee, open my laptop, and force myself to write down one thing I was grateful for. Some days it was simple: "I'm still breathing." Other days, it was defiant: "He doesn't get to define me anymore." I was working as an assistant in a marketing firm back then, nothing fancy, just long hours, a low paycheck, and a cubicle that smelled like burnt paper and cheap air freshener. But one afternoon, while scrolling through emails, I saw a campaign pitch that changed everything. The client wanted a strategy to promote eco-friendly beauty products, but the team's ideas were dull and corporate. I remember thinking, what if I made something real? Something people actually connect with? So that night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. creating my own version of the pitch. One that told a story instead of just selling a product. I built a whole narrative around self-worth, transformation, and second chances. Funny, right? I was basically writing my own life into a marketing campaign. The next morning, I emailed it anonymously to the team lead. 2 weeks later, that same pitch became the foundation of a $500,000 client deal. And everyone was praising the mysterious creative mind behind it. I stayed quiet. I didn't need recognition yet. I needed a plan. Then came the turning point. My boss, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara Jennings, called me into her office one morning. I expected another routine task list, but she looked up at me with this piercing smile. "You know," she said, "you remind me of myself at your age. Hungry, focused, and a little angry at the world." I laughed awkwardly, pretending not to know what she meant. Then she leaned forward. "I know it was you who wrote that campaign." My heart stopped. "How?" She smirked. "Because no one else in this office writes like that. There's pain in your words, the kind that sells because it's real." I was speechless. She didn't scold me. She didn't ask why I went behind anyone's back. Instead, she offered me something better, mentorship. From that day forward, Clara became my silent weapon. She taught me how to negotiate, pitch, build clients, and most importantly, how to own a room. "You want to be successful, Rachel?" she said once, pointing her pen like a sword. "Then stop trying to be liked. Be respected." That line stuck with me. Over the next year, I saved every extra dollar I could. I stopped going out, stopped wasting time on things that didn't matter. I poured everything into learning, online courses, branding strategies, financial management, everything I could get my hands on. And when I finally had $8,000 in savings, I did something that terrified me. I quit my job. My hands were shaking when I told Clara, but she just smiled and said, "Good, it's about damn time." I used that money to start my own small marketing agency, Phoenix Rising Media. Yeah, I know, dramatic name, but it felt right. Because that's exactly what I was doing, rising from the ashes of everything Ethan burned down. The early months were brutal. Some days I barely made enough to pay rent. I'd work 14-hour days, pitch to dozens of clients, and get ghosted by most of them. But slowly, something started shifting. My work wasn't corporate, it was emotional, real, honest. I understood heartbreak. And I turned that understanding into brand storytelling that resonated with people. Within a year, one of my campaigns went viral. A women's clothing brand with the tagline, "You don't need him to feel beautiful." It exploded online. I was flooded with clients. One evening, as I was signing my 5th contract that month, I caught my reflection in the glass window of my small downtown office. I barely recognized the woman staring back. No tears, no fear. Just focus. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was winning, but success has a strange side effect. It attracts ghosts. One night, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I saw a familiar name pop up under people you may know. Ethan Miller, same smug smile. New job title, regional manager at Haverly & Co. And guess who his boss was? The same woman he cheated on me with. I couldn't help but laugh. Here I was, building my own company, creating my own legacy, while he was still sitting under the thumb of the woman he betrayed me with. It didn't hurt anymore. It almost felt poetic. But then, an idea started forming. Something dangerous. Something deliciously satisfying. Because I had just landed a potential contract with Haverly & Co., Ethan's company. And suddenly, the universe was handing me the perfect setup for revenge. The email came in on a Friday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to pour through my office blinds, golden, soft, and deceptive. Like calm before a storm. Subject, marketing partnership opportunity, Haverly & Co. I stared at it for a full minute, my fingers frozen above the keyboard. I knew that name too well. Ethan's company. The same one run by her, his boss, the woman he'd chosen over me. For a second, I considered deleting it. I had moved on. I had money, freedom, and peace. But peace, as it turns out, doesn't always mean closure. Sometimes, to heal completely, you have to look your pain in the eye and smile. I clicked it open. They were looking for a new marketing agency to handle a rebranding campaign for their luxury product line. Budget, $1.2 million. Timeline, 3 months. I almost laughed out loud. The irony was too rich. "Guess we're about to play, Ethan," I whispered to myself that weekend. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept spinning, sketching ideas, strategies, outcomes. I wasn't planning on just winning the contract. I was planning to own it. By Monday morning, my plan was already in motion. I gathered my small but fierce team. 3 women who had believed in me when I had nothing but drive and cheap coffee. We spent the next week building a pitch so sharp it could cut glass. It was sleek, emotional, powerful, everything corporate marketing usually isn't. When we presented it at the downtown conference room of Haverly & Co., I made sure every detail reflected quiet confidence. Not arrogance, just power. And then, halfway through the meeting, the door opened, Ethan walked in. My breath caught for a second, but I didn't flinch. He looked exactly the same, maybe a few more gray hairs, maybe a little heavier. But still that same man who once held my heart like it was disposable. His eyes widened when he saw me. Rachel. I smiled politely, professional and detached. Mr. Miller, long time. He stuttered something about not knowing I own Phoenix Rising Media. I could tell from his face he wasn't just surprised. He was intimidated. Good. Sitting next to him was Victoria Haverly, the woman. Tall, polished, with perfect posture and that expensive kind of confidence that money gives. I'd seen her once before, from a distance. But seeing her in person, knowing everything she had done behind my back, it was like watching a ghost in daylight. Still, I kept my cool. I delivered my presentation flawlessly. Every slide, every sentence, every strategic move was deliberate. I didn't just sell marketing. I sold the emotion behind their brand. When I finished, Victoria leaned back and smiled. Impressive, she said. I'll admit, I didn't expect this level of vision from a small agency. I met her gaze and smiled sweetly. Sometimes the smallest companies make the biggest impact, especially when they're built from pain. Ethan's face twitched slightly. He knew exactly what I meant. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to a follow-up. I walked out of that building with my head high, my heels clicking like gunfire on the marble floor. But that was just phase 1. See, revenge isn't just about getting back at someone. It's about timing. You don't throw fire when they expect heat. You make them comfortable first, then light the match. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Phoenix Rising Media had been awarded the contract. I sat there in silence for a few moments, the phone pressed to my ear. Letting it sink in, not only was I about to lead a $1.2 million campaign, I was now technically Ethan's boss. I wish I could say I didn't enjoy that moment. But I did. Every single second of it. Over the next month, we worked closely with Haverly and Co.'s executive team. Ethan had to attend every strategy meeting, sitting across from me while I led discussions. Watching him squirm every time I spoke was its own kind of satisfaction. He tried to act casual, even friendly. Once, during a coffee break, he approached me. Rachel, I just want you to know, I'm really proud of you, he said, voice awkward and careful. I tilted my head. Proud? Yeah, you've come so far. You look happy. I smiled. I am. It's amazing what honesty and independence can do for a person. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, Victoria called him over. I watched as she barked instructions at him, the same way she probably talked to him when no one was watching. That's when I realized something. He wasn't happy either. He traded love for ambition, but all he'd gotten was a cage. Still, I wasn't done. During one of our later presentations, I revealed the new brand slogan I'd created for Haverly & Co. Rebuild, reinvent, rise stronger. The words hit the room like a silent bomb. Ethan's eyes dropped immediately, and even Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, they felt it. What they didn't know was that the slogan wasn't just a message for the company, it was for me. My story, my rise, my silent victory written right into their brand identity. When the campaign finally launched, it blew up. Massive engagement, record-breaking sales, and nationwide recognition. Phoenix Rising Media became the talk of the industry. And just like that, my revenge was complete, or so I thought, because a few weeks later, I got another email. This one wasn't from a client. It was from Victoria herself. She wanted to meet privately to discuss a potential partnership. And that's when I knew the real game was just beginning. When Victoria asked to meet in person, she picked the Meridian, that glossy hotel restaurant where deals are made over overpriced salads and polite smiles. She suggested lunch. I suggested noon. I wanted sunlight. I didn't want to give her the luxury of the dark. She arrived looking effortless, silk blouse, perfectly set hair, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're untouchable. She greeted me like an equal, all smiles and veneers. Rachel, I've been watching your work. Phoenix Rising has a pulse I admire. The compliment was a hook wrapped in sugar. She wanted me because I had credibility her brand needed. I wanted her because she had power I could expose. We both wanted something. The only difference was how far each of us was willing to go to get it. She talked in circles about synergy and long-term growth, using the language of partnerships as if it were a lullaby. I listened, asked the right questions, took mental notes. She offered me a deal that, on paper, looked generous. Haverly & Co. would invest in a joint creative lab, fund a new campaign, and, crucially, give Phoenix Rising the kind of mainstream access I'd only dreamed of. When she smiled and slid a neatly folded contract across the table, I let my fingers rest on it. My palms were cool. Inside that document, among legalese and warm promises, was a clause that made my pulse quicken. A clause about transparency and third-party audits for any funds labeled R&D or brand enhancement. It was a standard clause. It was also the key, Victoria said, leaning in. We could do great things together. I like your perspective, Rachel. I smiled back like I was reading a good book. I like what Haverly stands for. Let's build something honest. That word felt heavy between us, like a dare. After lunch, I didn't sign. I took my time. I walked out with the contract in my bag and a plan in my head. Because you don't catch a predator with force, you catch them with patience and precision. Back at the office, I told my team I was playing a longer game. I asked them to do something a bit risky: reach out, discreetly, legally, to past Haverly employees and contractors who had worked on brand projects. Promise anonymity. Promise truth. Ask for documentation, emails, invoices, anything that smelled like malpractice. I won't lie, there's a moral gray to what we did. We weren't breaking the law. We were asking people who had been stepped on to tell their stories. People started to talk. Old contractors remembered expedited invoices, last-minute reallocations of funds, and brand audits that never actually happened. One former project manager sent screenshots of a spreadsheet that showed money earmarked for community partnerships being shifted into a line labeled executive discretion. Another sent a voice memo of a meeting where Victoria's CFO dismissed a request to fund employee mental health programs as not brand critical. Every piece fit together like a puzzle. Not just betrayal in my marriage, but betrayal on a larger scale, a culture of manipulation, suppression, and financial sleight of hand. We built what I called The Reveal, a short, documentary-style video that wove together interviews, documents, screen grabs, and voice memos. We framed it around the work we were about to do together, a case study on authenticity. We asked Haverly for a showcase night, a gala to unveil the new brand film and to celebrate the partnership. Victoria agreed. She wanted the optics. She wanted applause. She wanted to own the narrative. The night of the gala, the ballroom was everything I expected: chandeliers like frozen stars, a sea of gowns, champagne that hid the taste of compromise. Victoria stood on stage, radiant, toasting to a bold new chapter. I stood in the shadows with a flute of champagne I didn't drink. Ethan was there too, forced into a smile he couldn't fully conjure. He tried to meet my eyes, and for the first time in months I saw raw fear in his expression. They introduced the campaign film as a celebration of reinvention. The lights dimmed. People leaned forward in their seats. I watched Victoria, watched her chest rise and fall. The same way you watch someone about to fall off a cliff and hope they get it right. When our video started, the first half was safe, lush visuals, brand messaging. The kind of emotional arc that sells perfume and prestige. It lullabied the crowd into the comfort of good PR, and then, slowly, the tone shifted. We cut to the spreadsheets. The voice memos played. The former project manager's interview, anonymized, but unmistakable, described the pattern of reallocations, and the way junior staff were pushed to sign off on invoices they didn't understand. We used on-screen highlights to show funds diverted from community work to shell entries. We exposed a trail of emails where launch budgets were inflated and then discounted through off-books transfers. I watched Victoria's face first. Her practiced composure cracked the tiniest bit. Then Ethan's, his hand went to his mouth like he could stop the words from reaching his ears. Around me, murmurs began to swell. A man in a tuxedo whispered into his wife's ear. APR rep made frantic notes. Security started to shift in their seats. The final blow, the crescendo, played. A clip from a board email where Victoria herself had signed off on a confidential executive reserve, with language implying personal discretion over those funds. The document had signatures. Not forged. Not ambiguous. Signed. The room detonated. Phones lit like a field of fireflies as people began recording. The gala, intended to crown Victoria's reinvention, had instead become a public audit. People stood. Conversations quickly turned to questions. Someone shouted for a corporate representative. Someone else started live streaming. Victoria's smile collapsed into something sharp and small. She looked at me, then at Ethan, as if measuring which of us carried the most damage. She had been playing a long game of optics. I had rewritten the optics overnight. By morning, the story was everywhere: industry blogs, social feeds, late-night commentary. Haverly and Co. announced an internal investigation. Victoria resigned from several public-facing roles. The board placed the CFO on leave pending review. Ethan's promotion was quietly withdrawn. Sources said his involvement in the projects was being scrutinized. The company's stock dipped that week, a small seismic tremor that toppled reputations. I didn't dance on anyone's downfall. Watching people lose power has a strange hollowness to it. My revenge wasn't about seeing them crushed in the street. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me. It was about making sure that when the world spoke of Haverly's reinvention, my voice was part of that story that night. Alone in my small office, I poured a glass of cheap whiskey and looked at the city lights. The satisfaction I felt was real, but it was quiet. Not the roaring vindication I had imagined in the beginning. Ethan texted a string of apologies and regret. I read them, folded my phone, and left the messages unread. I had won. The world had seen the truth. But victory didn't erase the nights on the bathroom floor, nor did it fill the absence beside me in bed. It did something else. It gave me back my power, and power, I learned, is a different kind of revenge than anger. It lasts longer. It rebuilds. It's strange how fast news travels when it's ugly. Within 48 hours. The Haverly scandal was trending across every major platform. Hashtags, think pieces, industry gossip. My name was buried in the story at first. But it didn't stay hidden for long. Someone from inside the event leaked that the campaign film had come from my agency. Suddenly, Phoenix Rising Media wasn't just a boutique firm. It was the company that had exposed one of the most powerful brands in the country. At first, it felt intoxicating. I'd wake up to a dozen new client inquiries every morning. Reporters wanted interviews. Investors wanted to align with our integrity. Everyone was talking about authenticity, accountability, truth. Words that sounded noble in headlines but felt heavy in my chest, because underneath the applause, there was chaos. Haverly's board was tearing itself apart. Lawsuits started flying. Employees were laid off while the investigation dragged on. And somewhere in that mess was Ethan, the man who once told me I was his safe place. He called again one evening. I ignored it. Then again and again, until I finally picked up, not because I wanted to hear him, but because I needed closure. When I answered, his voice was small. Rachel, please don't hang up. I didn't say anything. I lost everything. They're blaming me. Victoria told the board I handled the budget transfers, that it was my department. I didn't even know half of what was happening. There it was, the panic, the desperation, the regret. You didn't know? I said quietly. You didn't know, just like I didn't know you were sleeping with your boss? He exhaled hard. I deserved that, I did. But you've made your point, okay? You've won. The word tasted bitter. I didn't do this for you, Ethan, I said. You were just a chapter one outgrew. He started crying, or maybe it was just the sound of him trying not to. I wish I could take it all back. I really do. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But pity is a trap. And I had already escaped once. I hope you learned something from all this, I said softly. And hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. But even as I tried to move on, the weight of what I'd done started creeping in. My campaign had turned into a scandal that hurt hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with the corruption. Innocent people were losing their jobs because of what I had exposed. I remember sitting in my office one night, scrolling through LinkedIn posts from Haverly staff saying goodbye to coworkers, talking about uncertainty, fear, unemployment. My chest tightened. This wasn't what I wanted. I hadn't planned to burn the whole building down. I just wanted justice. But maybe revenge doesn't come with precision. Maybe it always spills. The next morning, my mentor, Clara, called. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't criticize me. She just asked, "Are you ready to live with what happens next?" I didn't answer, she sighed. You played it smart, Rachel. But smart doesn't always mean right. That hit hard. For days, I couldn't focus. Every interview request felt hollow. Every praise sounded like static. The truth is, when you win by taking someone down, the celebration doesn't last because a part of you stays down there with them. I decided to turn the noise into something else. If people wanted to talk about authenticity, fine, I'd give them a reason to. Phoenix Rising Media launched a new initiative, the Honest Brand Project. We partnered with small, female-led businesses, giving them free branding and marketing help in exchange for one promise: complete transparency. No fake numbers. No exploitation. No corporate lies. It was my way of balancing the scale, of proving that power could be used differently. The project took off fast, not because it was genius, but because people were starving for something real. Within 6 months, we had featured more than 50 brands. Our story was picked up by national media, not for scandal this time, but for hope. Still, at night, I couldn't sleep sometimes. I'd think about Victoria, where she was, what she was doing. After the scandal, she vanished. Rumors said she left the country, others said she was negotiating settlements. But deep down, I knew she wasn't gone. People like her don't disappear. They reinvent. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my receptionist stopped me. Someone dropped this off for you. It was a white envelope, no return address. Inside was a short note on thick paper, written in perfect cursive. You've become exactly what I always knew you could be. No threat. No apology. Just acknowledgement. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't fear I felt, it was understanding. She wasn't my enemy anymore. We were reflections of each other, just shaped by different kinds of hunger. I burned the note that night. Watched the flame curl around the edges and fade into smoke. By the end of that year, I was officially a millionaire. My company had grown beyond anything I imagined. But what made me proud wasn't the money, it was that I'd built it, without anyone else's shadow over me. One afternoon, while filming a promotional piece for our website, the interviewer asked, "If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?" I smiled, thinking of that girl crying on the bathroom floor 2 years ago. "I'd tell her that pain is expensive," I said. "So if you have to pay for it, make sure you get something valuable in return." She laughed softly. "And what did you get?" "Freedom," I said. "And a story worth telling." As I left the studio that day, the sky was clear and blue. The kind of color that looks almost unreal. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not the quiet after revenge, but the kind that comes when you've finally outgrown your enemies. I wasn't the same woman Ethan cheated on. I wasn't the assistant who doubted her worth. I was Rachel Carter, founder, creator, survivor. And this time, my success wasn't born from pain. It was born from power. It's strange how life circles back, not in the way we imagine, but in the way we need. A year after the Haverly scandal, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership summit in New York. The theme was rising from ruins. I almost turned it down. I wasn't a motivational speaker. I was just someone who had survived her own chaos. But when I saw the lineup, CEOs, activists, creators, I realized that maybe my story belonged there too. I remember standing backstage, hands trembling slightly around my cue cards. My assistant whispered, "You've got this, Rachel." And when I stepped onto that stage, the lights hit me like a confession. Hundreds of faces looked up, women of all ages, waiting to hear something real. I used to think success was about climbing. I began. About titles, recognition, power. But what I've learned is that sometimes success is just surviving what was meant to destroy you. Silence. And then, slowly, people began nodding. I told them everything, the betrayal, the firing, the revenge, the fallout. Not as a hero, not as a victim, just as a woman who had learned the hard way that strength isn't about what you do to others. It's about what you rebuild after they break you. When the talk ended, people stood and clapped. Some even cried. But what stayed with me was a young woman who came up afterward. She couldn't have been older than 25, she said. "Your story made me feel less stupid for believing in the wrong people." I smiled. "You weren't stupid. You were loyal." There's a difference. That moment stayed with me. Because I realized my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about permission. Permission for women to feel angry, to fight back, to rebuild, and to still call themselves good. In the months that followed, I started a mentorship program for women in toxic work environments. We called it Project Reclaim. We didn't just teach them business, we taught them boundaries, self-worth, and the art of walking away before the world breaks you. Every story I heard reminded me of myself. The fear, the silence, the exhaustion, but also the fire. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through the messages we received. "Your program gave me courage to quit. I finally asked for the raise I deserved. I'm starting my own company next month." Each one felt like a quiet victory. And then one day, out of nowhere, I got an email. No subject line, just a single line of text: "You turned the ashes into something beautiful." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just peace arriving without an apology. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. For so long, I had associated those lights with competition, ambition, survival. But now, they looked different, softer, almost kind. It's funny, people always talk about revenge like it's a storm. Loud, destructive, unstoppable. But what they don't tell you is that after the storm ends, you're left standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out who you are without the thunder. I had spent years defining myself by what I lost, what I exposed, what I conquered. But that night, I realized I didn't want to live my whole life as a reaction. I wanted to create. A month later, I took a trip. No work, no emails, no deadlines. Just me. I went to the coast of Maine, rented a small cabin, and spent a week by the ocean. Every morning, I'd sit by the shore, notebook in hand, and write, not campaigns, not strategies, just thoughts. On the 5th day, I wrote something that would change everything. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live beautifully beside it. Those words became the title of my first book. Beside the past, it wasn't a tell-all or a revenge memoir. It was a reflection, raw, honest, and real. I wrote about love, ambition, betrayal, and what it means to build something new from broken pieces. When the book came out, it hit the bestseller list in 2 weeks. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the emails and letters from readers who said, "You made me feel seen," and that's when I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, or replaced. Every woman who had been told to move on before she was ready. Every woman who learned that sometimes you don't need closure. You just need to grow so far beyond the pain that it can't reach you anymore. One evening, after a signing event, I was walking through the city when I passed the old Haverly building. The company had been bought, rebranded, reborn. The new sign read Luminex Global. Different name, same walls. I stopped across the street, just staring at it. Not with anger, not with nostalgia, just quiet acceptance. For years, that place had been the center of my story. The battlefield, the wound. But standing there, I realized it no longer had power over me. It was just another building. I took one last look, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me who I am." Then I turned and walked away, back home. I poured a glass of wine, opened my journal, and wrote the final line of my journey. Revenge built my empire. But healing made me human, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreams.